The storm was screaming outside, the restaurant lights flickered once, twice, and then Evan Mercer heard the one sound that stops a father's heart cold. Silence. His daughter's laughter had vanished. He spun around, his date forgotten, his chest compressing with primal terror as he scanned the dining room. Empty booth, no pink winter coat, no 7-year-old girl. And then he saw it. The restaurant door swinging in the wind, snow billowing inside like a white fury, and his world shattered for the second time in 3 years. But this time, a stranger with sad eyes and a designer coat was already running into the storm beside him, and he didn't even know her name. If you're watching this story unfold, please stay with me until the very end, because what happens next will restore your faith in Christmas miracles. And comment below with your city so I can see how far this story has traveled across the world. The Chicago wind cut through the streets like a promise of pain, whipping December snow into spirals that danced beneath the yellow glow of streetlights. Evan Mercer stood outside Marigold Bistro with his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets, staring at the warm amber light bleeding through the frosted windows, and he wanted nothing more than to turn around and go home. He'd been standing there for 7 minutes. 7 minutes of watching couples duck inside, shaking snow from their shoulders, laughing at nothing in particular. 7 minutes of remembering what it felt like to be half of something whole. 7 minutes of betraying the memory of the only woman he'd ever loved by even considering the idea of sitting across from someone new. "This is stupid," he muttered to the empty sidewalk. But then he felt the small hand slip into his, and he looked down to see Mia gazing up at him with those impossibly serious eyes. Emma's eyes. The same shade of hazel that changed with the light. The same intensity that saw straight through every lie he told himself. "Daddy," she said quietly, her breath misting in the cold. "Aunt Carol says you can't be lonely forever." Evan's throat tightened. "I'm not lonely, sweetheart. I have you." That's different. Mia's voice carried a wisdom that no 7-year-old should possess, the kind that comes from watching a parent disappear into grief and learning to navigate around the broken pieces. Aunt Carol says adults need adult friends too. And maybe someone who makes you smile the way you smile in the old pictures. He wanted to tell her that those smiles were gone, buried 3 years ago on a rain-slicked highway when a drunk driver decided to run a red light and take Emma from them. He wanted to tell her that happiness like that doesn't come twice in one lifetime. He wanted to tell her that every single woman he'd met in the past year, every well-meaning setup from concerned friends, had felt like an insult to what he'd lost. But Mia was looking at him with such fierce hope that he couldn't form the words. "Okay," he heard himself say, "but just for an hour, and then we go home and watch Home Alone. Deal?" Mia's face lit up like the Christmas tree in their apartment window. Deal. She wasn't supposed to be here at all. The blind date, arranged by Carol, his sister-in-law, who refused to let him waste away in that apartment like a ghost, was supposed to happen while Mia stayed overnight at her house. But then Mia had cried. Genuine tears streaking her round cheeks as she clutched her stuffed rabbit and begged not to be left behind on Christmas Eve, and Evan had broken. So they'd compromised. Carol had called ahead to the restaurant, arranged a small table in the back corner where Mia could color quietly, while Evan attempted this excruciating exercise in moving forward. The restaurant owner, a kind older woman named Patricia, who'd known Emma from the bookstore where she'd worked, had agreed immediately. Now Evan pulled open the door to Marigold Bistro, and warmth rushed out to meet them, along with the scent of roasted garlic, fresh bread, and mulled wine. The interior glowed with soft Edison bulbs strung across exposed brick walls. A massive Christmas tree dominated one corner, decorated with handmade ornaments and white lights that reflected off vintage mirrors and polished wood. It was exactly the kind of place Emma would have loved. The thought hit him like a fist to the sternum. "Welcome!" Patricia appeared from behind the host stand, her silver hair pinned back with a festive clip shaped like a snowflake. Her smile faltered slightly when she saw Evan's face. She'd been at Emma's funeral, had held his hand during the reception when he couldn't stop shaking, but she recovered quickly. "Your table is ready, sweetheart, and this must be Mia. My goodness, you've gotten so tall." Mia offered a shy smile, pressing closer to Evan's side. Patricia led them through the bustling dining room. Every table seemed full of people who belonged to each other, Families sharing appetizers, couples holding hands across candlelight, groups of friends laughing too loud over wine. Evan felt like an imposter, a man pretending he still knew how to exist in spaces designed for joy. "She's already here," Patricia whispered as they approached a table near the back. "Arrived 10 minutes ago. Seems lovely. Nervous, though." Evan's stomach dropped. Nervous? First blind date in years, apparently. Her friend set it up. Patricia patted his arm. "You're both scared to death. That's a good start. Means you're both still capable of feeling something." Before Evan could process that observation, they rounded a decorative partition made of reclaimed wood and frosted glass. And there she was. The woman was beautiful in a way that made Evan immediately uncomfortable. Not because beauty bothered him, but because he'd been expecting someone safe. Someone ordinary enough that he could get through this obligation without actually having to confront the fact that other people existed, that life continued, that somewhere underneath the grief he might still be capable of noticing things like the elegant line of a woman's neck or the way light caught in dark hair. She sat with perfect posture, her hands folded on the white tablecloth, wearing a charcoal sweater that probably cost more than Evan's monthly rent, and silver jewelry that caught the light when she moved. Her face was composed, beautiful, and utterly closed off, the expression of someone who'd learned to armor herself against the world. When she looked up and their eyes met, Evan saw something flicker across her features. Not interest exactly, more like recognition, the kind that happens when one exhausted person spots another in a crowd. "Hi," he managed, his voice coming out rougher than intended. "I'm Evan. This is Mia," the woman finished, and something in her face softened as she looked at his daughter. "Your Aunt Carol told me about you. I'm Juliet." She extended her hand, first to Mia, who shook it with exaggerated seriousness, then to Evan. Her grip was firm and brief, professional rather than intimate, and Evan felt a rush of gratitude that she wasn't trying to pretend this was anything other than what it was. Two people going through motions to satisfy well-meaning friends. "I hope it's okay that Mia's here," Evan said as Patricia discreetly set up a smaller table about 15 feet away, tucked behind the Christmas tree, where Mia would have a view, but some privacy. Last-minute change of plans. Of course. Juliet's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "I like children. They're honest in a way adults have forgotten how to be." Something about the way she said it, with a faint edge of bitterness, made Evan study her more carefully. Up close, he could see the faint shadows beneath her eyes, carefully concealed with makeup. The tension in her shoulders despite the relaxed pose. The way her fingers kept finding the silver bracelet on her wrist, twisting it in a repetitive motion that spoke of anxiety. She was as miserable as he was. The realization should have been comforting. Instead, it just made him sad. Patricia appeared with menus and a basket of warm bread. "Mia, sweetheart, I've got a special table just for you with crayons and coloring books. Your dad will be right over there where you can see him the whole time, okay?" Mia looked uncertainly between Evan and Juliet. For a moment, Evan thought she might refuse, might cling to him the way she had in the months after Emma died when she couldn't bear to let him out of her sight. But then she nodded and took Patricia's hand, letting herself be led to the small table behind the decorated tree. Evan watched her go, fighting the urge to follow, to scoop her up and retreat to the safety of their apartment where the world couldn't ask anything of them. "She's lovely," Juliet said quietly, pulling his attention back. "She has your eyes." Her mother's, actually. The words came out before he could stop them, defensive and raw. He watched Juliet's face for the reaction he'd gotten from every other date Carol had forced on him. The uncomfortable sympathy, the awkward scramble to change subjects, the sudden careful distance. But Juliet just nodded, her expression unreadable. "Carol mentioned you lost your wife. I'm sorry. 3 years ago." Evan didn't know why he was offering information, except that silence felt worse. "Car accident, drunk driver." "That's not long enough," Juliet said, and there was something fierce in her voice. "People always say it's been X amount of time, as if grief has an expiration date. It doesn't." Evan stared at her. "No, it doesn't." They sat in uncomfortable understanding for a moment, the noise of the restaurant filling the space between them. Evan could hear Mia's soft voice as Patricia brought her hot chocolate. could see the top of her head bobbing as she colored, safe and occupied. Your friend who set this up, Evan started, reaching for anything to break the tension. How long have they been? A waiter appeared, young and enthusiastic, armed with a wine list and unwavering optimism. Good evening! Can I start you folks off with something to drink? We have a wonderful mulled wine special for the holiday. Water, Evan and Juliet said simultaneously. The waiter's smile faltered. Just water? Just water, Juliet confirmed, her tone making it clear the conversation was over. As the waiter retreated, clearly deflated, Juliet met Evan's gaze and he saw the faintest hint of amusement in her eyes. I hate mulled wine, she said. It's basically hot fruit punch that makes you dizzy. Emma loved it, Evan said, then immediately regretted bringing her up again. Sorry, I'm not good at this. Neither am I. Juliet picked up a piece of bread, then set it down without eating it. My friend Simone has been trying to get me to get back out there for 2 years. She means well. They all mean well. But it feels like everyone wants you to move on before you figured out how to keep moving at all, Juliet finished. She twisted the bracelet again. Yes. Evan felt something ease in his chest. Not comfort, exactly. More like the relief of not having to explain himself. How long? He asked quietly. Juliet's jaw tightened. My sister died 5 years ago. My fiancé, she paused, seeming to weigh how much truth to offer. He didn't die. He just betrayed me with her best friend 6 months after the funeral, so I suppose I lost 2 people that year. The bitterness in her voice was sharp enough to cut. Evan found himself leaning forward, drawn by the honesty of her pain. I'm sorry. Don't be. He did me a favor, showed me that trust is just another word for temporary delusion. She said it lightly, but her knuckles were white around her water glass. Before Evan could respond, there was a crash from somewhere in the restaurant, dishes shattering, followed by a burst of laughter and applause as staff rushed to clean up. The sound made him flinch, muscle memory from the accident still carved into his nervous system. Every sudden noise was a car colliding with metal, glass breaking, Emma's last breath. Hey! Juliet's voice cut through the spiral. Breathe, it was just plates. Evan realized his hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against the table, embarrassed. I'm fine. You're not. Neither am I. Juliet's voice was matter of fact. That's why we're here, isn't it? 2 broken people going through the motions to satisfy everyone else's narrative about healing. She was right. God, she was exactly right, and Evan didn't know whether to laugh or walk out. This is a terrible date, he said finally. The worst, Juliet agreed. I've been to funerals with better energy. And despite everything, the grief, the discomfort, the profound wrongness of sitting across from someone who wasn't Emma, Evan felt his mouth twitch toward a smile. Should we just call it? Save ourselves the awkwardness of pretending to enjoy overpriced pasta? Juliet considered this, tilting her head slightly. In the candlelight, her features softened, and Evan could see traces of the person she might have been before whatever had broken her. Probably, she said, but I already drove through that nightmare storm outside, and I can see your daughter watching us from behind that tree with very serious investment in how this goes. So maybe we could just be honest? No pretending, no performance. Just 2 people having a meal and admitting it's terrible. Evan glanced over at Mia, who was indeed peering around the Christmas tree, her coloring forgotten. When she saw him looking, she waved enthusiastically, her whole face bright with hope. His chest ached. She thinks this is going to fix me, he said quietly. Mia, she heard Carol on the phone saying I needed to live again. And now she's convinced that if I just meet the right person, everything will be like it was before. Like we can just replace what we lost. You can't, Juliet said simply. No one can replace what you lost. That's not how it works. I know that, but she's 7. She still believes in magic. Maybe that's not the worst thing. Juliet's voice was soft. Believing in something impossible. At least she hasn't given up. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Evan studied Juliet's face, the careful makeup that couldn't quite hide the exhaustion, the expensive clothes that armored her against intimacy, the silver bracelet she kept twisting like a talisman against feeling anything real. She had given up. Somewhere along the way, she'd decided that hope was more dangerous than loneliness. He understood that impulse completely. The waiter returned with their water and took their orders with considerably less enthusiasm than before. Evan ordered the first thing he saw, some kind of chicken dish he'd forget immediately. Juliet requested soup and salad, the kind of meal you order when you're eating out of obligation rather than hunger. When they were alone again, Evan found himself asking, "What was her name? Your sister?" Juliet's hand stilled on the bracelet. For a moment he thought she wouldn't answer. Then quietly, "Sophie. She was 19, freshman in college, meningitis. She had a headache one morning, and by that evening she was gone." God. Evan didn't have words for that kind of speed, that kind of cruelty. At least with Emma, there had been EMTs, a hospital, a few hours to say goodbye, even though she'd never regained consciousness. Not that it had helped. Not that anything helped. "She was supposed to be home for Christmas that year," Juliet continued, her voice distant. "But she stayed on campus for some party. I was so angry with her. We fought about it on the phone. The last thing I said to her was that she was being selfish." She laughed, but it sounded like breaking glass. "That's what I get to carry forever. Selfish. That was my last word to her." Evan reached across the table before he could think better of it, covering her hand with his. "She knew you loved her." "Did she?" Juliet didn't pull away, but she didn't meet his eyes either. "I spent so much time being the responsible older sister, the one who always had her life together, who always knew better. I don't know if I ever just let her know that she was enough exactly as she was, that she didn't need to be anything other than Sophie." "She knew," Evan said firmly. "Maybe not intellectually, but in the way that matters, in the bones, in the muscle memory of growing up together, she knew. The same way Mia knows I love her even when I'm drowning in grief and barely functional. Love like that doesn't need words." Juliet finally looked at him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Do you really believe that?" "I have to," Evan said simply. "Otherwise, what's the point of any of it?" They sat like that for a long moment, hands touching across the table, two strangers connected by the specific gravity of loss. Around them, the restaurant continued its Christmas Eve celebration, laughter and clinking glasses and the warm smell of food that tasted like comfort. But in their small corner, time seemed to slow, allowing them space to exist in their brokenness without judgment. Then Mia appeared beside the table, her hands stained with marker and her expression troubled. "Daddy, the crayons are all wrong." Evan blinked, pulling his hand back from Juliet's. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "The blue isn't the right blue for the sky. It's too dark. It needs to be—" She paused, searching for the word. "More happy." Despite everything, Evan felt warmth bloom in his chest. This was pure Mia, seeing colors in terms of emotions, wanting the world to match some internal vision of how things should be. Emma had been the same way, choosing paint colors for the apartment based on how they felt rather than how they looked. "I'll see if Patricia has other crayons," he started, but Juliet was already standing. "I'll check with the hostess," she offered. "I could use a moment to—" She didn't finish the sentence, but Evan understood. Sometimes you needed to move, to physically step away from intensity before it overwhelmed you. As Juliet walked away, Mia climbed into her abandoned chair and fixed Evan with a serious stare. "Do you like her?" "Mia? Because I think she's sad like you're sad, but different sad. Like maybe if you put different sads together, they make something less sad." Mia's logic was uniquely her own, childlike and yet devastatingly perceptive. "That's not really how it works, sweetie." "How do you know?" Mia challenged. "You haven't tried." Evan didn't have an answer for that. Before he could formulate one, Mia was already scrambling down and heading back to her coloring table. He watched her go, feeling off balance, like the world had tilted slightly and he was still finding his footing. When Juliet returned with a small box of crayons, Patricia had apparently kept art supplies specifically for visiting children. Her composure had been restored. The vulnerability from moments earlier was locked away again behind the professional mask. "She's very observant," Juliet said as she slid back into her seat. "Too observant sometimes. She sees things that adults try to hide. Maybe that's her superpower. Juliet smiled, but it was sad around the edges, seeing the truth underneath all our careful pretending. Their food arrived and they ate in relative silence, occasionally exchanging comments about the quality of the meal or the increasing intensity of the storm outside. Through the restaurant's tall windows, Evan could see snow falling in thick sheets, accumulating rapidly on the sidewalks. Wind rattled the glass, and somewhere in the distance, a car alarm wailed. "It's getting worse out there," Juliet observed, frowning. "Weather reports said light snow." "Chicago weather reports are basically fiction," Evan replied. "You learn to prepare for the opposite of whatever they say." She laughed at that, a real laugh that transformed her face completely. For just a moment, Evan caught a glimpse of who she might be without the weight of grief and betrayal, someone bright, someone capable of joy. Then the moment passed and the armor slid back into place. They were debating whether to order dessert when the restaurant lights flickered once, twice, and then held steady. Around them, conversations paused as people glanced up nervously. Patricia appeared at their table, her expression concerned. "I just checked the weather. That storm has intensified much faster than expected. The city is advising people to stay off the roads for the next several hours. Power outages reported in 3 neighborhoods already." Evan's stomach dropped. He twisted in his seat to look at Mia, who was still coloring peacefully, oblivious to the developing situation. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that I'm going to start offering free coffee and hot chocolate to anyone who needs to wait it out here. The last thing we need is people trying to drive in whiteout conditions." Patricia's eyes were kind but firm. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need, both of you." As she moved away to inform other diners, Evan pulled out his phone. The screen lit up with multiple emergency alerts, blizzard warning, travel advisory, power outage reports spreading across the city. He pulled up the traffic cameras, and what he saw made his chest tighten. The streets were nearly invisible beneath swirling snow, visibility reduced to a few feet. "We're stuck here," he said, more to himself than Juliet. "I need to call my office." Juliet was already dialing, her voice shifting into the professional tone of someone used to managing crises. "I had a presentation scheduled for tomorrow morning. Yes, Simone, it's me. Listen, I'm not going to make it home tonight. The storm. No, I'm fine. I'm at a restaurant. Yes, the blind date. Can you call Robert and push the presentation to Monday?" While she handled logistics, Evan texted Carol to let her know the situation. Her response was immediate and predictable. "Good. Maybe the universe is forcing you to actually spend time with someone. Be safe." "Mia okay?" "She's fine," he typed back. "And this isn't the universe, it's just bad weather. Same difference. Love you." He pocketed the phone and looked up to find Juliet watching him. "Everything okay?" she asked. "My sister-in-law thinks the storm is cosmic intervention designed to force me into human connection. My best friend thinks I need to open my heart to possibility." Juliet's tone was dry. "Apparently our friends have all read the same self-help book about grief. The one where they skip the part about how moving on feels like betrayal? That's the one." She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "I'm starting to think we're the only sane people in our respective social circles. Or the only broken ones. Maybe there's no difference." They were both laughing when Mia appeared again, but this time her expression was different. Not the troubled look from before, but something stranger, excited, determined. "Daddy," she said, tugging on his sleeve. "I need to tell you something important." "What is it, sweetheart?" Mia glanced at Juliet, then back to Evan, then leaned in close to whisper in his ear. Her breath was warm against his skin, her small hands gripping his shoulders for balance. And then she said the words that would change everything. "She's the one, Daddy." Evan pulled back, stunned. "Mia..." But she was already retreating to her coloring table, as if she'd just delivered a perfectly ordinary observation about the weather, rather than a 7-year-old's verdict on his romantic future. Juliet was watching him with curious eyes. "What did she say?" Evan felt heat creep up his neck. "How did you explain to a stranger that your daughter had just declared her the one based on approximately 45 minutes of observation?" "Just kid stuff. Nothing important." But Juliet's expression suggested she knew he was lying. Before she could press, the restaurant lights flickered again, longer this time, plunging them into brief darkness before the backup generator kicked in and emergency lighting illuminated the space with an eerie blue-white glow. Several diners gasped. A child somewhere started crying, and through the windows the storm screamed louder, as if the world outside had become a living thing determined to keep them exactly where they were. Evan looked at Mia, safe, occupied, unaware of the way everything was shifting. Then at Juliet, guarded, haunted, but here, present in a way that felt both terrifying and strangely inevitable. "Well," he said quietly, "I guess we're in this together now. At least until morning." Juliet met his gaze and held it. "At least until morning," she echoed. And outside the storm raged on, rewriting the night in snow and wind, and the strange, terrible possibility that broken people might find something like hope in the least likely places. The emergency lighting cast strange shadows across the restaurant, transforming the cozy bistro into something otherworldly. Evan watched as Patricia moved through the dining room with practiced calm, her voice steady as she reassured patrons that they had plenty of food, working generators, and no reason to panic. Around them, the initial shock was giving way to nervous laughter, people making jokes about unexpected sleepovers and calling loved ones to explain why they wouldn't be home for Christmas Eve. But Evan couldn't shake the tension coiling in his chest. Being trapped wasn't the problem. The restaurant was warm, Mia was safe, and they had everything they needed. The problem was sitting across from him, twisting that silver bracelet again, her carefully maintained composure starting to show hairline cracks. "I should check on Mia," he said, needing to move, to do something with the restless energy building under his skin. "Of course," Juliet replied, but there was something in her voice, relief, maybe, or gratitude for the interruption. Evan made his way to the small table behind the Christmas tree where Mia sat surrounded by her coloring masterpiece. She'd abandoned the simple winter scene from the coloring book and had instead created her own elaborate drawing across multiple sheets of paper taped together. A house with smoke curling from the chimney, 3 stick figures holding hands in front of it, snow falling like stars around them. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," Evan said, crouching beside her chair. "Tell me about it." Mia pointed to each figure in turn. "That's you? That's me? And that's—" She paused, glancing toward where Juliet sat. "That's someone who needs a home too." Evan's throat tightened. "Mia, we talked about this. You can't just decide that someone belongs with us because you want them to." "Why not?" Mia's eyes were impossibly earnest. "You always say that the best things happen when you're not looking for them. Maybe she's a best thing." "It doesn't work like that with people." "How does it work then?" Evan realized he didn't have an answer. How did it work? He'd met Emma at a bookstore. She'd been reaching for the same mystery novel he wanted, and they'd laughed about it, and 3 months later he'd known with absolute certainty that she was his person. No logic, no plan, just recognition, like something in the universe clicking into place. But that was before. Before the accident. Before the funeral. Before learning that certainty was just another word for temporary. "It works slowly," he finally said. "With time, and getting to know someone. Not just deciding in one night." Mia considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. "How much time?" "I don't know. Months? Years, maybe." "That's too long. What if she leaves before you figure it out?" The question hit harder than it should have. Evan kissed the top of Mia's head, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo. "Then she leaves. Some things aren't meant to be, even if we want them to be." "I don't believe that," Mia said firmly. "Mommy used to say the universe puts people together who need each other. You and that lady both need each other, I can tell." Before Evan could respond to this devastating piece of 7-year-old wisdom, a commotion near the entrance drew his attention. A group of people who'd apparently tried to leave were stumbling back inside, their coats covered in snow, faces red from wind exposure. "It's impossible out there," one man was shouting, brushing ice from his beard. "We made it maybe 20 feet before we couldn't see the building anymore, nearly walked straight into traffic." Patricia was already moving toward them with towels and hot drinks. "I told you folks to wait." This is exactly why the city issued the advisory. The restaurant's atmosphere shifted from inconvenience to genuinely concerned. People pulled out phones, checking weather updates, calling family members. The volume rose as multiple conversations competed for space. Evan heard fragments. Stuck here overnight. Power's out in Lincoln Park. They're saying it might not clear until morning. He glanced back at Juliet, who was staring out the window with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not fear exactly, more like calculation, as if she was measuring the storm against some internal metric and finding it wanting. When he returned to their table, she didn't look at him right away. "I hate being trapped," she said quietly. "Hate not having control over when I can leave, where I can go. It's—" She stopped, pressing her lips together. "Triggering," Evan offered. "That's the therapy word for it, yes." A bitter smile. "After Sophie died, I developed this thing about exits. Always knowing where they are, always having a plan to leave any situation. My therapist says it's about control. If I can always escape, then nothing can hurt me the way that hurt me." Evan understood that impulse more than he cared to admit. "Does it work?" "No, it just makes you lonely." She finally met his eyes. "And exhausted. It's exhausting, constantly preparing to run." Before Evan could respond, the lights flickered again. And this time, they didn't come back on. The emergency lighting held for a moment, then that too died, plunging the restaurant into complete darkness broken only by the faint glow of phone screens and the Christmas tree lights, which apparently ran on a separate battery backup. Someone screamed. Multiple people gasped. Evan's hand instinctively reached for his phone, using its flashlight to cut through the darkness, his heart hammering as he turned toward Mia's table. But the Christmas tree lights were enough to see by, and Mia was right where she'd been, looking around with wide eyes, but no panic. "Daddy?" "I'm here, baby. I'm right here," Patricia's voice cut through the rising anxiety. "Everyone, please stay calm. We have battery-powered lanterns, and I'm going to distribute them now. The backup generator should kick in shortly." "We've been through this before." Restaurant staff moved efficiently through the darkness, lighting candles on tables, distributing the promised lanterns. Within minutes, the space was transformed into something almost magical, soft golden light dancing off the walls, shadows gentle rather than threatening. The modern bistro had become something older, more intimate, like a gathering place from a different century when people knew how to exist together in darkness. Evan returned to Mia, helping her gather her coloring supplies. "I think you should sit with me now, sweetheart, just until the lights come back." Mia nodded, clutching her drawing. Together they made their way back to the main table where Juliet waited, illuminated by a single candle that carved elegant shadows across her face. "Room for one more?" Evan asked. "Of course." Juliet shifted to make space, and Mia immediately climbed into the booth beside her, spreading her drawing on the table with pride. "I made this," she announced. "It's a home for people who need one." Juliet studied the drawing with genuine attention, not the performative interest adults often showed children's art. "These are snowflakes?" she asked, pointing to the stars Mia had drawn. "Snow stars," Mia corrected, "because snow is made of stars, just frozen ones that fell down." "That's beautiful," Juliet said, and her voice carried something fragile. "Did you know my sister used to say something similar? She said every snowflake was a wish someone made that turned solid so it could travel to the person who needed it most." Mia's eyes went wide. "Your sister was smart." "The smartest." Juliet's smile was painful to witness. "She would have liked you." Evan watched them together, his daughter and this stranger who felt less strange with every passing hour, and felt something shift in his chest. Not opening, exactly, more like cracking. The first movement of ice that's been frozen solid for too long. Around them, the restaurant had settled into an uneasy but manageable calm. People were sharing tables, strangers becoming temporary communities. Patricia and her staff moved through the room offering hot chocolate, coffee, whatever comfort they could provide. Someone near the bar had started playing Christmas music on their phone, volume low, and the familiar melodies added to the surreal intimacy of the situation. "How long do you think we'll be stuck here?" Juliet asked, watching the snow continue its relentless assault on the windows. "Based on how fast it's accumulating, could be hours. Maybe until dawn." Evan ran a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry, this isn't exactly the evening either of us signed up for." "No," Juliet agreed, "but I'm starting to think the evening we signed up for would have been worse. At least this is honest. No pretending, no performance, just survival. Mia looked up from her drawing. Why do adults always talk about pretending? Don't you get tired of not being real? The question landed in the silence between them like a stone in still water, sending ripples outward. Evan and Juliet exchanged glances, and he saw his own discomfort reflected in her expression. Yes, Juliet finally said, I get very, very tired of it. Then why do you do it? Because being real hurts. And sometimes pretending is easier than feeling everything all at once. Mia absorbed this with the gravity it deserved. Then, with the kind of logic only children possessed, she said, But if you're always pretending, how do you know when something real happens? You might miss it because you're too busy being fake. Evan felt the words hit him like a physical blow. Out of the mouths of babes, Emma used to say. Children see the truth we're too scared to acknowledge. Juliet's hands had stilled on the bracelet. She was staring at Mia with something like wonder. You're absolutely right, she said softly. I might miss it entirely. Before the moment could deepen further, a crash of dishes from the kitchen startled everyone. Patricia appeared seconds later, looking frazzled. Nothing serious, she called out. Just some confusion in the dark. Everyone's fine. But the interruption had broken whatever spell had been weaving itself around their small table. Mia yawned, the long day finally catching up with her, and Evan felt his own exhaustion settling into his bones. You should rest, sweetheart, he said, pulling Mia close. It's been a big night. I'm not tired, Mia insisted, even as her eyes drooped. Juliet stood abruptly. I need some air, or at least I need to move. Sitting is making me anxious. Evan understood the impulse, but glanced toward the windows where the storm showed no signs of relenting. I don't think... Just to the vestibule, Juliet clarified. I won't go outside. I'm not stupid. I just need... space. She walked away before he could offer to accompany her, her silhouette disappearing around the partition. Evan held Mia close, feeling her small body grow heavy as sleep finally claimed her despite her protests. He adjusted his position so she could curl against his chest, her breathing evening out into the rhythm that meant dreams were taking over. In the candlelight, with his daughter sleeping and the storm raging and the world reduced to this one warm room full of strangers, Evan let himself acknowledge what he'd been trying to ignore all evening. He liked Juliet. Not in some grand romantic sense, they were both too damaged for that kind of simplicity, but in the way you like someone who understands the language of grief, who doesn't try to fix what's broken in you because they know some things stay broken, and that's okay. He liked that she was prickly and honest, that she didn't perform comfort or fake connection, that she looked at Mia and saw an actual person rather than an accessory to his tragedy. He liked her, and it terrified him because liking someone meant opening doors he'd been keeping sealed with grief and guilt, and the bone-deep certainty that he didn't deserve to feel anything good ever again. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Juliet didn't return. Evan's unease grew, though he told himself it was irrational. She was fine. She was just getting air, dealing with her own anxiety about being trapped. But the feeling persisted. A low-level hum of wrong that he'd learned never to ignore after Emma's death had taught him that terrible things happened in the spaces between heartbeats. When 15 minutes had passed and Juliet still hadn't come back, Evan carefully extracted himself from Mia's embrace and flagged down Patricia. Can you sit with her for just a moment? He asked. I need to check on someone. Patricia nodded, already moving to take his place. Of course, honey. She'll be fine. Evan made his way through the dimly lit restaurant toward the entrance, passing tables of people who'd given up on leaving and were settling in for a long night. The temperature dropped noticeably as he approached the vestibule, the double doors doing little to keep out the cold that seeped through every crack. He expected to find Juliet standing by the windows, maybe on her phone, giving herself the distance she'd needed, but the vestibule was empty. Evan's heart kicked into a higher rhythm. He checked the bathroom. Empty. Checked the small waiting area. Empty. His mind tried to supply rational explanations even as fear started climbing his spine. Maybe she'd gone to the kitchen to ask Patricia something. Maybe she'd found a quiet corner somewhere else in the restaurant. But when he pushed open the inner door and saw the outer door slightly ajar, snow swirling in through the gap, rational thought vanished entirely. No, he breathed. No, no, no. He grabbed his coat from where Patricia had hung it, shoving his arms through the sleeves as he pushed through the door into the howling violence of the storm. The cold hit him like a fist, wind so strong it nearly knocked him backward. Snow stung his exposed skin, and within seconds his face was numb, visibility reduced to a few feet of white chaos. "Juliet!" he screamed, but the wind ate his voice. "Juliet!" He couldn't see her, couldn't see anything, just snow and darkness, and the kind of cold that killed people who got lost in it. Panic clawed at his throat, the same panic from 3 years ago, standing in a hospital corridor while doctors told him there was nothing they could do, that Emma was already gone, that sometimes accidents happen too fast for medicine or prayer or love to matter. "Juliet!" He took 3 steps forward, then 5, hand outstretched as if he could somehow grab her from the void. The restaurant door was already invisible behind him. He was losing his orientation, the storm a living entity determined to separate him from anything solid or real. And then he heard it, a voice, faint but there, calling back. "Help! Help!" Yevon plunged toward the sound, his boots sliding on ice he couldn't see. He nearly fell twice, catching himself on what might have been a street sign or a parking meter. His hands were already numb inside his coat pockets, and he couldn't feel his face at all. "Keep talking," he shouted. "I'm coming. Just keep—" He nearly tripped over her. Juliet was on the ground, half buried in a drift of snow, her expensive coat soaked through and offering no protection against the storm. She was shaking violently, her lips already turning blue, and when she looked up at him, her eyes were wide with a terror that had nothing to do with the cold. "I saw—" Her teeth were chattering so hard she could barely form words. "There was someone— I thought I saw someone out here, and I didn't think— We need to get you inside." Yevon hauled her to her feet, but she immediately collapsed against him, her legs unable to hold her weight. "Come on, work with me. We're not far, just a few steps." "Can't," she gasped. "Can't feel— Everything's—" Yevon looked back the way he thought they'd come, but the storm had erased all landmarks. There was no restaurant, no street, no anything. Just snow and cold, and the very real possibility that they were both about to die in a blizzard on Christmas Eve, because Juliet had seen something that probably wasn't there, and he'd been stupid enough to follow her. Then, a miracle. A faint glow through the white, golden, and steady. The Christmas tree lights visible through the restaurant window, a beacon in the chaos. "There," Yevon said, pointing. "See that? That's where we're going. You're going to walk, and I'm going to help you. And we're going to make it, because I have a 7-year-old daughter in there who needs me to survive this. Understand?" Juliet nodded, or maybe she was just shaking, but she let him half carry, half drag her toward the light. Every step was a battle against wind that wanted to push them backward, snow that wanted to blind them, cold that wanted to steal the last of their warmth. Yevon's lungs burned from breathing air that felt like knives. His hands had gone completely numb, and he couldn't tell anymore if he was holding on to Juliet or if she was holding on to him. But the light grew stronger, and stronger still. And then suddenly there were hands pulling them forward, Patricia's voice shouting orders, the blessed warmth of the restaurant interior swallowing them whole. Yevon collapsed just inside the door, his body shaking so violently he couldn't control it. Someone threw blankets over him, but he pushed them aside. "Juliet, where—" "She's here," Patricia said firmly. "She's okay. You're both okay. Just breathe, honey. Just breathe." Yevon managed to focus his vision enough to see Juliet sitting on the floor a few feet away, surrounded by people wrapping her in blankets, removing her soaked coat, pressing hot drinks into her shaking hands. Her face was still pale, her lips still blue, but she was conscious and moving and alive. "What the hell were you thinking?" The words came out harsher than Yevon intended, fear transmuting instantly to anger. "You could have died out there. You could have—" "I know." Juliet's voice broke. "I know, okay? I saw something moving out there and I reacted without thinking. I thought someone was in trouble. I thought—" She stopped, wrapping her arms around herself. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The fight drained out of Yevon as quickly as it had come. She'd done the same thing he had, seen someone potentially in danger and run toward it without calculating the risk. It was stupid and brave and fundamentally human, and he couldn't be angry at her for it because he'd made the exact same choice. "It's okay," he said, his voice gentler now. We're okay. That's what matters. Your daughter, Juliet whispered, and there was anguish in her voice. What if you died out there? What if I... But I didn't. We didn't. Evan met her eyes across the small distance. We're here. Patricia appeared with more blankets and insisted they both sit by the fireplace she'd somehow gotten working despite the power outage. Someone brought hot chocolate spiked with whiskey, and Evan didn't even consider protesting as he drank it, feeling warmth slowly return to his extremities. Mia was still asleep at their original table, Patricia's teenage daughter watching over her. Seeing her safe, undisturbed by the drama that had just unfolded, made something in Evan's chest loosen. Juliet sat beside him on the floor, wrapped in what looked like every spare blanket the restaurant possessed. Her hair was wet and tangled, her makeup completely gone, and she looked younger somehow, more vulnerable. The armor had been stripped away by the storm, leaving only the person underneath. I have anxiety, she said suddenly, staring into the fire. Not just general worry, clinical anxiety, PTSD from Sophie's death. My therapist says I have hypervigilance. I'm constantly scanning for threats, constantly waiting for the next terrible thing. So when I looked out that window and saw movement, my brain just decided someone was in danger, and I had to save them. Had to, because I couldn't save Sophie, couldn't save anything that actually mattered. Evan didn't know what to say to that level of honesty. He settled for the truth. I understand. After Emma died, every time Mia was out of my sight for more than 10 seconds, I'd panic. Still do, sometimes. Like the universe is just waiting for another chance to take someone I love. Does it get better? I don't know. It's been 3 years and I'm still terrified all the time. But maybe... He paused, considering. Maybe the fear isn't the problem. Maybe trying to avoid it is what makes us do stupid things like run into blizzards. Juliet laughed, but it was wet with tears. So what? We just live in terror forever? That's the answer? No. We just stop pretending we're not terrified. We acknowledge it, and then we do the things that matter anyway. He turned to look at her. You ran out there because you thought someone needed help. That wasn't your trauma acting. That was you being brave. They're not always easy to tell apart. She was crying now, silent tears cutting tracks through what remained of her makeup. I haven't cried in front of anyone in 5 years, she said. Not at Sophie's funeral. Not when my fiancé left. Not in therapy. I just stopped being able to. Maybe you just needed permission. Evan reached out carefully, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. Her fingers were still ice cold, but they gripped his with surprising strength. You don't have to keep it together right now. The storm already took your armor. Might as well let it take the rest. So she cried. Not delicate, pretty tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. And Evan just held her hand and let her, because he knew from experience that sometimes the only thing that helped was having someone witness your breaking and not try to fix it. Around them, the restaurant continued its strange Christmas Eve vigil. People were settling in for the night, making beds out of booth cushions, sharing food and stories, creating temporary family out of necessity. The storm raged outside, but inside there was warmth and light and the particular intimacy that comes from shared survival. When Juliet finally stopped crying, she didn't pull away immediately. They sat there on the floor by the fireplace, shoulders touching, watching the flames dance while the world tried to freeze itself solid outside. Thank you, she said quietly, for coming after me. Thank you for not dying, Evan replied. It would have really ruined the date. She laughed, surprised out of her. This is without question the worst date in the history of dates. Or the best, Evan countered. At least we'll never forget it. Fair point. She finally looked at him, and her eyes were red but clear. Your daughter was right, you know, earlier, when she said we're both sad in the same way. Different sads that might make something less sad. Mia has a concerning habit of being right about emotional things she has no business understanding. Maybe she just sees clearly because she hasn't learned yet how to lie to herself. Juliet squeezed his hand once before letting go. I should check on her, make sure she's still sleeping, and apologize for nearly getting her father killed. She doesn't know what happened. She'll just be happy you're okay. They stood together, steadier now, and made their way back to where Mia slept. Patricia's daughter smiled and slipped away, returning to help her mother with the other stranded patrons. Mia hadn't moved, her face peaceful in sleep, one hand still resting on her drawing of the house with 3 figures. Juliet stared at that drawing for a long moment. Then, so quietly Evan almost missed it, she whispered, "What if she's right? What if we are supposed to find each other?" Evan's heart stuttered. He wanted to say something profound, something that would capture the impossibility of this night, the storm, and the near death, and the strange, fragile connection forming between them. But all he managed was, "I don't know, but I'm willing to find out." Juliet looked at him then, really looked at him, and Evan felt seen in a way he hadn't since Emma died. Not fixed, not saved, just seen. "Okay," she said. "Okay, let's find out." And in that moment, with his daughter sleeping between them, and the storm still raging, and the future nothing but uncertainty, Evan felt something he thought had died with Emma. Hope. It was terrifying, but it was there. The hope lasted exactly 47 minutes. Evan had been helping Patricia distribute blankets to the other stranded patrons, feeling the adrenaline from the rescue finally settling into something manageable, when he noticed Juliet had moved to a quiet corner near the darkened bar. She was on her phone, her posture rigid, and even from across the room he could see the tension radiating from her shoulders. He didn't think much of it at first. Everyone was making calls, checking in with family, rearranging plans disrupted by the storm. But then a man appeared beside her, tall, expensively dressed even in casual clothes, with the kind of aggressive confidence that filled whatever space he occupied. Evan watched as the man leaned in close to Juliet, saying something that made her entire body go still. She shook her head, said something back, but the man just smiled and kept talking. There was something predatory in his body language, the way he'd positioned himself to block her exit from the corner, the way his smile never reached his eyes. Patricia appeared at Evan's elbow, following his gaze. "That's Damon Vale," she said quietly. "Came in about an hour ago, right before the power went out. Friend of the owner's son, so he tends to act like he owns the place. Been watching your table all night." Something cold settled in Evan's stomach. Watching us? Watching her specifically, the way a cat watches a mouse. Patricia's voice carried disapproval. "You might want to check on her." Evan was already moving. He wove through clusters of people who'd given up on maintaining separate tables and had formed small communities around shared candles and borrowed warmth. As he got closer, he could hear fragments of the conversation. "Can't believe you actually went through with it," Damon was saying, his voice pitched just loud enough to carry. "I mean, we all thought the charity program was a joke when Robert suggested it, but you really committed to the bit." Juliet's voice was tight. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, come on, Jules. Don't play coy. The whole office knows about Robert's little social experiment, pairing executives with, how did he put it, less privileged matches to teach us humility during the holidays." Damon's laugh was sharp enough to cut. "Though I have to admit you're really selling it. That little rescue scene earlier, Oscar-worthy. The guy probably thinks you actually care." Evan felt the words hit him like a physical blow. His footsteps faltered, uncertainty replacing his forward momentum. Charity program. Less privileged matches. The guy probably thinks you actually care. He saw Juliet's face go white. "That's not... Damon, that's not what this is. Robert never... Please, I saw the email chain." Robert feeling guilty about his privilege. Deciding to give back by setting up blind dates between executives and people struggling to make ends meet. Very noble. Very pointless. Damon's eyes flicked toward Evan, and something predatory sharpened in his expression as he realized they had an audience. "Oh. Speak of the devil." Juliet spun around, and the devastation on her face told Evan everything he needed to know, or thought he did. Every insecurity he'd been carrying about not being successful enough, educated enough, wealthy enough to deserve happiness again, crystallized into certainty. This whole thing had been charity. Pity. Rich people playing at compassion while he'd been stupid enough to think connection was forming, that maybe broken people really could help each other heal. "Evan," Juliet started forward, but he took a step back. "Don't." His voice came out flat, emotionless, even as his chest felt like it was caving in. "Just don't." "It's not what he said. There's no program. Robert never..." "Really?" Evan heard himself asking, and he hated how small his voice sounded. Because it makes sense now. All of it. Why someone like you would agree to meet someone like me. Why you'd stay through the awkwardness. Why you'd be so understanding about... He stopped, unable to finish. About my dead wife. About my grief. About all the broken pieces I thought you saw as something other than a charity project. Damon was watching with barely concealed satisfaction, and that made everything worse. This was entertainment to him. Evan's humiliation, Juliet's distress, just another story he'd tell at office parties. There is no program, Juliet insisted, her voice rising with desperation. Damon is lying. He's wanted me to go out with him for months, and when I kept saying no, he... Oh, please, Damon interrupted. Don't make me the villain here. I'm actually doing the guy a favor. Better he knows now what this really is before he gets too attached. He turned to Evan with mock sympathy. Look, man, I'm sure you're a nice guy. Single dad, dead wife, very tragic. But you had to know this was weird, right? Woman like her, suddenly interested in a... What do you do again? I'm a teacher, Evan said, and he heard the defensiveness in his own voice, the shame. Middle school history. Right, teacher, noble profession, terrible pay. Damon's smile was poison wrapped in false friendliness. And she's a senior marketing executive pulling in mid-six figures. You didn't think that gap was a little suspicious? Every word was a knife finding the soft spaces between Evan's ribs. Because he had thought it was suspicious, had questioned from the first moment why someone like Juliet would agree to this date. The only thing that had kept him from bolting immediately was the recognition in her eyes, that sense of shared grief that seemed to transcend circumstances. But maybe that had been part of the act too. Maybe she'd researched him, knew about Emma, prepared herself to play the role of understanding confidant. Rich people did that, didn't they? Learned to perform empathy as a social skill. Evan, please, Juliet's voice cracked. Look at me. Really look at me. Do I seem like someone who's acting right now? He did look. Saw the tears gathering in her eyes, the genuine panic in her expression, the way her hands were shaking as she reached toward him. And for a moment he wavered, because people didn't look like that when they were lying, didn't sound like that, didn't shake like that. But then his mind supplied another explanation: guilt. She felt guilty for the deception, for letting him believe something real was happening when it was all just performative compassion. I need to check on Mia, he said, and he was already turning away, unable to look at either of them anymore. Evan, wait. But he was done waiting, done hoping, done believing that maybe the universe had something good left for him after all. He walked back through the restaurant in a daze, barely seeing the people he passed, barely feeling the warmth from the candles and fireplace. Inside his chest, something was collapsing, folding in on itself like a star dying. When he reached their table, Mia was awake, rubbing her eyes and looking around with confusion. Daddy? What's happening? Why is everyone sleeping here? The storm got worse, sweetheart. We have to stay until it's safe to leave. His voice sounded normal somehow, even though he felt like he was falling apart. That was fatherhood, learning to keep it together even when your world was ending because your child needed you steady. Where's Juliet? The name hurt to hear. She's talking to someone. Is she coming back? Mia's eyes were too perceptive, seeing through his careful neutrality. You look sad again, Daddy. Did something bad happen? No, baby, nothing bad. He pulled her close, breathing in the strawberry scent of her hair, letting her solid realness anchor him. I think maybe we were wrong about tonight, about what it meant. Wrong how? How did you explain adult complications to a 7-year-old? How did you tell your daughter that sometimes people were kind not because they cared, but because it made them feel better about themselves? That charity could look like connection if you wanted it badly enough? Sometimes people are nice because it's the right thing to do, not because they want to be, he tried. And that's okay. It's still nice, but it's different from really caring, Mia finished, and the disappointment in her voice nearly broke him. So she doesn't really care? She was just being polite? I don't know, sweetheart. He stopped because Juliet was there suddenly, standing at the edge of their table with an expression that made her look like she'd been running, though he knew she'd only walked across the restaurant. Can we talk? She asked quietly. Please, just 5 minutes. I don't think 5 minutes, she repeated. And if you still want me to leave you alone after that, I will. I'll go sit on the other side of the restaurant and you'll never have to look at me again. But please, Evan, let me explain. Mia was watching both of them with wide, anxious eyes. Evan didn't want to do this in front of her, didn't want her to witness whatever conversation was about to happen. But Patricia was already there, offering to take Mia to the kitchen to help make hot chocolate for the other stranded families. And Mia went willingly, though she kept looking back over her shoulder with worry etched across her small face. When they were alone, Juliet slid into the booth across from him. Up close, he could see she'd been crying again, mascara smudged beneath her eyes, her careful composure completely shattered. There is no charity program, she said, speaking quickly as if afraid he'd interrupt. Damon made that up. He's had this obsession with me for months, showing up at my office, sending flowers, asking me out constantly, even though I've made it clear I'm not interested. And when he found out about tonight, my friend Simone accidentally mentioned it at work, he came here specifically to sabotage it. Evan wanted to believe her. God, he wanted to believe her so badly it physically hurt. But the words Damon had used kept echoing in his mind. Less privileged matches, teaching us humility. The guy probably thinks you actually care. Why would he do that? He asked, and he could hear the skepticism in his own voice. Because he's petty and vindictive and he doesn't like being told no. Juliet's hands were flat on the table, palms down, as if she was trying to ground herself. He thought if he could ruin this, if he could make me miserable enough, I'd eventually give in and go out with him instead. It's twisted logic, but that's who he is. So there's no email chain, no program? No. You can check my phone if you want. You can call my friend Simone right now and ask her. This date was her idea because she's been worried about me, because I haven't let anyone get close in 5 years, because she thought maybe if I met someone who understood grief. Her voice broke. She set this up because she cares about me, not because of some corporate initiative. Evan studied her face, looking for tells, for the kinds of micro-expressions that indicated lying. He'd gotten good at reading people after Emma died. When everyone had opinions about how he should grieve, when distant relatives came out of nowhere with advice and judgment, he'd learned to spot the difference between genuine concern and performance. Juliet looked terrified, desperate, but not dishonest. Okay, he said slowly. Let's say I believe you about the program. Let's say Damon was lying. That still doesn't change the fact that there's a massive gap between our lives. You're successful, wealthy, educated, and you think that matters? Juliet leaned forward, intensity blazing in her eyes. You think I give a damn about any of that? Evan, I've dated successful men, rich men, men who looked perfect on paper and made my friends jealous. And every single one of them ran the moment things got difficult. The moment I mentioned Sophie, or showed any sign of actual emotion, or needed anything more than polite dinner conversation. So what? I'm different because I'm already broken? The bitterness in his voice surprised him. Because I won't run when things get hard since I'm already living in hard? No. Her voice went soft, almost gentle. You're different because when I told you about Sophie, you didn't change the subject. When I ran into a blizzard like an idiot, you ran after me. When I cried, actually cried, not pretty tears, but ugly, desperate sobbing, you didn't try to fix me or tell me everything would be okay. You just held my hand and let me break. The words hit him in the chest, finding all the places Damon's cruelty had bruised. Juliet, and yes, there's a gap in our circumstances. I have money you don't have. I went to schools you couldn't afford. I wear clothes that cost more than they should, and I live in an apartment that's too big for one person. But none of that has made me happy. None of it protected me when Sophie died, or when my fiancé betrayed me, or when I spent 5 years waking up every morning wondering if it was worth getting out of bed. Her eyes were bright with tears again. The only time I've felt anything real in years was tonight, sitting across from you, being honest about how broken we both are. Evan's throat was tight. He wanted to believe her so badly that it scared him, that level of want, because wanting meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant the universe could hurt him again. How do I know you're telling the truth? He asked, and he hated how small his voice sounded. How do I know this isn't just another story, another performance? You don't, Juliet admitted. You just have to decide whether to trust me or not. And I know that's asking a lot. I know trust is the hardest thing in the world when you've lost someone you loved, but I'm asking anyway. She paused, her expression shifting to something raw and unguarded. Because I like you, Evan. I like your daughter. I like that you smell like bookstores and worry too much and turn grief into teaching because you need to believe the world still has meaning. I like that you're not trying to save me or fix me or make me into someone easier. I like that when you looked at me tonight, you saw another broken person instead of a project. The restaurant noise faded away. There was just Juliet's voice, Juliet's eyes, the truth written across her face in a language Evan had almost forgotten how to read. I'm terrified, he confessed, of getting this wrong, of letting Mia get attached to someone who leaves, of... He stopped, swallowing hard, of betraying Emma's memory by feeling something for someone else. I know, Juliet said gently. I'm terrified too, of opening up to someone and having them prove that everyone who warned me love was temporary was right. Of caring about your daughter and watching her grow up and remembering that Sophie never got to grow up. Of being happy for even 5 minutes and having the universe punish me for it. They sat in that shared fear for a moment, two people standing at the edge of something that could destroy them or save them, with no way to know which until they jumped. Then Mia was back, Patricia trailing behind her with an apologetic expression. She insisted, Patricia said she needed to talk to both of you right now. Mia climbed into the booth beside Evan, but her attention was entirely on Juliet. That man said mean things, she announced. I heard him, but he was lying. Mia, Evan started. No, Daddy. Listen. Mia's voice carried that fierce certainty that sometimes made her seem much older than 7. When people lie, they smile too much. Their eyes don't match their mouth. That man's eyes were mean even when he was smiling. But she pointed at Juliet. Her eyes are sad but not mean. And when she looks at you, they get less sad. That's how you know someone cares. The sad gets less. Evan felt something crack inside his chest, out of the mouths of babes. His daughter, who'd been watching people's faces since Emma died, learning to read emotions because her own father couldn't always hide his, had just articulated what he'd been too scared to acknowledge. When Juliet looked at him, her sadness got less too. Mia, Juliet's voice was thick with emotion. Thank you for that. But your dad has every right to be careful, to protect himself and you. I know, Mia said seriously, but being careful and being scared are different. Mommy used to say that being brave means being scared and doing the thing anyway. Evan's eyes burned. Emma had said that all the time, usually right before dragging him into something that terrified him, skydiving, traveling to countries where they didn't speak the language, having a baby when they'd only been married 2 years, and Evan had been convinced he wasn't ready. Being brave means being scared and doing the thing anyway. He looked at Juliet, really looked at her, and saw past the expensive clothes and the careful makeup to the person underneath. Saw someone who'd run into a storm to help a stranger. Someone who'd sat on a restaurant floor and cried without pretense. Someone who understood that grief didn't have an expiration date and that some things stayed broken, and that was okay. Saw someone who might be worth the risk. Okay, he heard himself say. Okay, I believe you. Juliet's expression transformed, relief washing over her features like sunrise. You do? I don't know if I should. I don't know if this is smart or if I'm just desperate to believe something good can still happen. But yes, I believe you. He paused, feeling Mia's small hand slip into his. Damon was lying? Damon was lying, Juliet confirmed. There's no program. This was just 2 friends trying to help 2 people who'd forgotten how to help themselves. And you're not here out of pity or obligation or I'm here because Simone wouldn't stop nagging me until I agreed to try, Juliet interrupted. And because some part of me that I thought was dead still believed maybe, possibly, someone might exist who understood what it's like to lose everything. Her voice softened. And then I met you and your ridiculous, brilliant daughter, and I thought maybe that dead part was trying to wake up. Mia squeezed Evan's hand. See, Daddy? I told you. Different sads that make less sad. Despite everything, the fear, the confusion, the emotional whiplash of the last hour, Evan felt himself smile. You did tell me that. I should have listened. You should always listen to me, Mia said with perfect 7-year-old confidence. I'm very smart. Smartest, Juliet agreed, and when she smiled at Mia, it reached her eyes completely. Patricia appeared again, this time with 3 mugs of the hot chocolate Mia had supposedly been helping make. Thought you folks could use something warm, she said, setting them down. And for what it's worth, I've been watching that Damon character all night. He's trouble. The kind of man who enjoys making others miserable. She looked at Juliet. Don't let him win, honey. I don't plan to, Juliet said firmly. As Patricia moved away to tend to other stranded patrons, they sat together in their booth, hands wrapped around warm mugs, the storm still raging outside but feeling somehow less threatening now. Mia immediately began telling Juliet about all the different people in the restaurant and the stories she'd invented for them. Patricia's daughter was actually a secret princess. The couple in the corner were spies. The family with 3 kids were circus performers waiting for their chance to run away. Evan watched his daughter's face light up as she talked, watched Juliet lean in with genuine interest, and felt the sharp edges of his fear start to dull. This could still go wrong. Damon could have been telling the truth, and Juliet could be lying so convincingly that even Mia's perceptive eyes were fooled. The storm could clear, and they could all go back to their separate lives and never speak again. But maybe, just maybe, Mia was right. Maybe different sads could make something less sad. Maybe broken people really could help each other heal, not by fixing what was unfixable, but by simply bearing witness to each other's brokenness and saying, it's okay, I'm broken too, we can be broken together. Evan. Juliet's voice pulled him from his thoughts. Mia had wandered off again, this time to show her drawing to a young couple at the next table. I want you to know something, whether this, she gestured between them, becomes anything or not, tonight mattered to me. You mattered to me. For the first time in 5 years, I felt like I could breathe without it hurting. I know what you mean, Evan said quietly. I've been holding my breath for 3 years, waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for the universe to finish what it started when it took Emma. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Tonight, with you, I forgot to hold my breath. I just breathed, and it didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. So what do we do now? Juliet asked. Where does this go? Evan glanced out the window at the storm, then back at her. I don't know, maybe nowhere. Maybe we leave here tomorrow and realize this was just one strange night born out of unusual circumstances. Or maybe we're brave, Juliet finished, scared and brave at the same time. Maybe, Evan agreed. They sat in that maybe for a long moment, neither reaching for certainty, both understanding that some things couldn't be rushed or forced or decided in a single night. The storm would clear eventually, morning would come, and then they'd have to figure out if what happened here could survive in the ordinary world. But for now, on this strange Christmas Eve with snow falling like stars, and a restaurant full of strangers becoming temporary family, they chose to sit together, to breathe together, to let themselves imagine that maybe, just maybe, broken people could build something new from the pieces, even if they didn't know yet what that something would look like. The storm showed no signs of weakening as midnight approached, and the restaurant had fully transformed into an impromptu shelter. Patricia and her staff had given up any pretense of running a business and were simply focused on keeping people comfortable and fed. Booth cushions became makeshift beds. Tablecloths served as blankets. The fireplace burned steadily, fed by wood. Patricia's son kept bringing in from the storage room. Evan watched Mia finally succumb to exhaustion again, her head resting against his shoulder, her breathing evening out into the rhythm of deep sleep. Across from him, Juliet sat with her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold, her eyes distant but not closed off, not armored the way they'd been at the start of the evening. She's resilient, Juliet said quietly, nodding toward Mia. After everything she's been through, she still believes in happy endings. I don't know if that's resilience or just that she's too young to know better, Evan replied. He adjusted Mia's weight against him, careful not to wake her. Sometimes I worry that I failed her, that I've been so consumed by grief that I've taught her the world is a dangerous place where good things don't last. But she's not afraid, Juliet observed. Look at her. She ran up to me tonight, a complete stranger, and decided I belonged in her life. That takes courage, not fear. Or naivety. Maybe they're the same thing at 7. Juliet smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. Sophie was like that too, fearless in ways I never was. She'd make friends with anyone, trust people instantly, believe the best about the world, even when the world didn't deserve it. Her voice caught. I used to think it would get her hurt someday. Turns out the thing that hurt her had nothing to do with trust or naivety, just bad luck and bacteria. Evan heard the weight in those words, the particular guilt of surviving when someone you loved didn't. He knew that guilt intimately, carried it in his bones. The guilt of being in the grocery store with Mia when Emma drove to pick up a prescription. The guilt of not insisting she wait until morning, of not offering to go himself, of the 1,000 small decisions that added up to her being in that intersection at the exact moment a drunk driver ran a red light. You can't protect people from everything, he said, as much to himself as to her. I've tried. God knows I've tried with Mia, but the universe doesn't care about how vigilant you are or how many precautions you take. So what's the point then? Juliet's question was genuine, not rhetorical. If we can't protect the people we love, if everything can be taken away in an instant, why risk loving anyone at all? Before Evan could attempt an answer to that impossible question, Mia stirred against him, murmuring something unintelligible before settling back into sleep. He felt her small hand clutch at his shirt, an unconscious gesture that she'd developed after Emma died, as if even in sleep she needed to confirm he was still there. That's why, he said finally, gesturing to Mia, because even knowing everything can disappear, even living with the constant fear of loss, the alternative is worse. Not loving anyone means being alone with your fear forever. At least this way, the fear has company. Juliet's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. That's the saddest and most beautiful thing I've ever heard. Welcome to grief, Evan said with a hollow laugh, where everything is sad and beautiful simultaneously. They fell into silence, but it was comfortable now, the kind that happens when two people have said enough hard truths that words become optional. Around them, the restaurant had grown quieter as people settled into makeshift sleeping arrangements. Patricia was moving through the space like a mother hen, distributing extra blankets and checking that everyone was as comfortable as possible. Damon had disappeared at some point. Evan didn't know when and didn't care. The man's cruelty had done its damage, leaving Evan raw and uncertain, but Juliet's truth had been stronger. Or maybe he'd just chosen to believe her because the alternative was giving up on the first genuine connection he'd felt since Emma died. Either way, she was still here. They were still here, together in this strange liminal space between their old lives and whatever came next. Can I ask you something? Juliet's voice was barely above a whisper. About Emma. Is it okay to ask about her? Evan tensed instinctively. Most people avoided mentioning Emma's name, as if saying it out loud would remind him she was dead, as if he ever forgot. But he forced himself to nod. Yes, it's okay. What was she like? Really like? Not the sanitized version people tell at funerals? The question caught him off guard. Everyone wanted to know how she died, how he was coping, whether Mia was in therapy. No one asked what Emma was actually like as a person. It was as if dying had turned her into a symbol rather than a human being. She was stubborn, Evan said, surprising himself with how easily the words came. Infuriatingly stubborn. Once she decided something was the right course of action, you couldn't talk her out of it with logic or reason or pleading. She just bulldozed forward and expected the universe to get out of her way. Sounds exhausting. It was. It was also... He paused, searching for the right word. Clarifying. She had this way of cutting through all the noise and fear and what-ifs and just acting. I overthink everything. Always have. I can talk myself out of anything if given enough time. Emma never gave me that time. She'd just say, "We're doing this," and suddenly we were doing it. Juliet smiled. That's how Mia decided I belonged with you two. Very decisive. She gets that from Emma. The certainty. I'm all anxiety and second-guessing, but Mia just knows things. Evan looked down at his sleeping daughter, feeling the familiar ache of loss mixed with gratitude that Mia existed at all. Sometimes I see Emma so clearly in her that it physically hurts. Other times Mia is completely her own person, and I'm amazed I get to be her father. What else? Juliet prompted gently. What else was Emma like? She sang off key constantly, in the shower, in the car, while cooking dinner. She knew she couldn't carry a tune but didn't care. Said music was supposed to be joyful, not perfect. Evan felt his throat tighten. I haven't been able to listen to music since she died. Mia will hum sometimes, and I hear Emma in it, and I have to leave the room. That's not fair. What isn't? That death takes the person and the joy of remembering them, that you can't even listen to music without it being a wound. Juliet's voice was fierce. Sophie loved terrible reality TV. The more dramatic and fake, the better. After she died, I couldn't watch television at all for 2 years. Every time I turned it on, I'd remember her laughing at some manufactured drama, and it felt like being stabbed. Do you watch it now? Sometimes. I force myself to. My therapist says avoiding triggers just gives them more power. So I watch cooking competition shows and tell myself Sophie would have commentary about every ridiculous contestant. She paused. It doesn't hurt less exactly, but it hurts differently, like a scar instead of an open wound. Evan understood that progression intimately. The first year after Emma died, everything hurt equally, sharp, constant, unbearable. The second year, some things started hurting less while others hurt more. By the third year, he'd learned to navigate around most triggers, though some still ambushed him when he least expected it. I'm terrified of getting to a point where I don't hurt at all, he confessed. Like, if I stop feeling the loss, it means she doesn't matter anymore, that I've moved on and left her behind. That's not how it works, Juliet said firmly. Moving forward isn't the same as leaving behind. You can carry Emma with you into whatever comes next. She doesn't have to disappear just because you learn to be happy again. You sound like my therapist. Your therapist is right. She leaned forward, and in the candlelight her eyes were earnest. Evan, can I tell you something I've never told anyone? Not my therapist, not Simone, no one. He nodded, feeling the weight of the moment, the trust she was offering. I'm glad Sophie died young, Juliet said, and her voice was barely audible. I'm glad she never had to experience betrayal or heartbreak or the slow, grinding disappointment of adulthood. She died still believing in magic, still thinking the world was fundamentally good, still excited about her future. And I know that's a terrible thing to be glad about. I know it's my trauma talking, but some part of me thinks maybe she got the better deal. Fast exit before the disillusionment could set in. Evan absorbed this, understanding the darkness behind it, the way grief could twist thoughts until you couldn't tell what was true and what was just protective armor. You don't really believe that. Don't I? Juliet's laugh was bitter. Look at us. Two people so damaged we can barely function. You can't listen to music. I can't trust anyone. We're both terrified of the future and guilty about the past. Maybe dying young and happy isn't the worst fate. But you're still here, Evan pointed out. Despite everything, you're still choosing to be here. That has to mean something. Does it? Or am I just too cowardly to opt out? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Evan felt something shift in his chest, a protective instinct he hadn't felt for anyone except Mia in 3 years. Juliet, I'm not going to do anything, she said quickly, reading his expression. I'm not suicidal, if that's what you're worried about. Sometimes I wonder what the point is, of continuing to exist in a world that takes the people you love and leaves you holding grief like a participation trophy. Evan reached across the table, covering her hand with his. Her skin was still cold from their earlier encounter with the storm, or maybe she was just always cold now, the way he was always tired. The point is, moments like this, where two broken people sit in a restaurant during a blizzard and tell each other the truth about how hard it is to be alive. That's the point. Juliet's fingers turned, interlacing with his. That's not much of a point. No, Evan agreed, but it's what we have, and maybe that's enough. They sat like that, hands joined across the table, while around them the restaurant breathed with the sleep of strangers. Patricia had dimmed most of the candles, conserving resources for the long night ahead. The fireplace cast dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the wind howled like something alive and angry. Then Mia spoke without opening her eyes, her voice thick with sleep. Broken people can fix each other. Evan startled. Sweetheart, I thought you were asleep. I was, but then I woke up because you were sad again. Mia sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes. She looked at Juliet with that unsettling perception that seemed beyond her years. You're sad too. Different sad than before. Deeper sad. I'm okay, Mia, Juliet said, but her voice wavered. No, you're not. But that's okay. Daddy's not okay either. Nobody's okay. Mia stated this as simple fact, not tragedy. But you came into the snow for me. You could have stayed inside where it was warm and safe, but you ran out into the cold to help someone you didn't even know. That's what good people do. Juliet's eyes filled with tears. Mia, Mommy used to say that broken people understand things that whole people don't. She said that cracks let the light in. Mia reached out, putting one small hand on Juliet's arm. Your cracks let lots of light in. I can see it. Evan watched as Juliet completely broke apart. Not the controlled crying from earlier, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. She pulled her hand from his to cover her face, shoulders heaving, and Evan saw years of carefully maintained composure collapse all at once. Mia, with the instinctive compassion of children who've known their own pain, climbed across the booth and wrapped her small arms around Juliet's neck. It's okay to cry. Crying means you still feel things. Daddy cries sometimes too, even though he tries to hide it. I hear him in the bathroom at night. Evan's chest constricted. He thought he was being discreet, running the water to cover the sound, only falling apart when he was sure Mia was asleep. But of course she knew. Children always knew. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I didn't want you to. It's okay, Daddy. I cry too. About Mommy. About missing her. About being scared you'll be so sad forever that you forget how to be happy. Mia kept holding Juliet but was looking at Evan now. But tonight, you smiled. You really smiled. Not the pretend smile you do when Aunt Carol asks if you're okay. You smiled because of her. She meant Juliet. And she was right. Despite the disaster of Damon's intervention, despite the fear and uncertainty, Evan had smiled genuinely tonight. Had felt something other than the constant low-level dread that had been his companion for 3 years. Juliet had lifted her head, tears still streaming down her face, but her breathing starting to even out. Mia, you are the wisest 7-year-old who has ever existed. I know, Mia said without arrogance. It's because I pay attention. Adults stop paying attention. They get busy being sad or scared or angry, and they forget to notice when good things are happening. She pulled back to look at Juliet seriously. You and Daddy are a good thing happening. You just have to notice. The simplicity of it was devastating. Evan met Juliet's eyes across the small space Mia occupied between them, and he saw his own fear reflected there, along with something else. Hope, maybe. Or just the willingness to imagine that hope might be possible. She's right, Juliet said, her voice rough from crying, about paying attention. I've spent 5 years deliberately not paying attention to anything that might make me feel something real. And tonight, she stopped, seeming to gather courage. Tonight, I paid attention, and it terrified me. But it also felt like waking up after a long, dreamless sleep. I know exactly what you mean, Evan said. Patricia appeared beside their table with fresh coffee and a gentle smile. You three doing okay over here? We're working on it, Evan replied, and it felt like the most honest thing he'd said all night. Good, that's all any of us can do. Patricia set down the coffee mugs. Storm's supposed to break around dawn. Few more hours and you'll be able to head home. She paused, looking between Evan and Juliet with knowing eyes. Though sometimes the universe keeps us in one place until we learn what we need to learn. After she walked away, Mia yawned and leaned against Juliet's shoulder. Can I ask you something? Of course, Juliet said, wrapping an arm around her. When your sister died, were you angry? Juliet went very still. Evan saw her throat work as she swallowed, saw the way her fingers tightened on Mia's shoulder. Yes, she finally said. I was furious. At the doctors for not saving her, at Sophie for going to that party instead of coming home. at God or the universe or whatever force was supposed to be watching over us, at myself for not being there, for not somehow knowing she was in danger. Me too, Mia said quietly. I was so angry when Mommy died, at the drunk man who hit her car, at Mommy for going to the pharmacy that night, at Daddy for not going with her, at myself for needing the medicine she went to get. Her voice got smaller. Is that bad? To be angry at people who died? Evan's heart shattered. He'd known Mia carried guilt about Emma's death. It had been cold medicine they'd needed, Mia running a fever. But hearing her articulate it so clearly was unbearable. Oh, sweetheart, Juliet said, pulling Mia closer. No, that's not bad. That's normal. When people die, we look for reasons, for someone to blame, because random tragedy is too scary to accept. But Mia, she cupped the little girl's face gently. Your mom didn't die because you needed medicine. She died because a man made a terrible choice to drive drunk. That's not your fault. It's not your dad's fault. It's not your mom's fault. It's just something terrible that happened. That's what my therapist says too, Mia replied. But knowing something in your head is different from knowing it in your heart. Evan had to look away, his eyes burning. His 7-year-old daughter had just articulated the central struggle of grief more clearly than any self-help book or therapy session ever had. You're right, Juliet said softly. It is different, and maybe the heart takes longer to understand than the head. Maybe that's okay. They sat together in that acknowledgement, 3 people carrying different griefs but understanding the weight the same way. Around them, the restaurant continued its quiet vigil. The fire crackled, wind rattled the windows. Time moved forward even when it felt like everything should stop. Eventually, Mia fell asleep again, this time with her head in Juliet's lap. Juliet stroked her hair absently, and Evan watched the gesture with something tight in his chest. Emma used to do the same thing, that same gentle, rhythmic motion that could soothe Mia through nightmares and fever and fear. Thank you, he said quietly, for being honest with her, about Sophie, about the anger. She needed to hear that from someone who isn't me. She's remarkable, Juliet replied, her hand never stopping its gentle movement through Mia's hair. You've done something right, Evan. Despite everything you've been through, you've raised someone who's empathetic and brave and wise beyond her years. I'm pretty sure that's mostly Emma's influence. I've just been trying not to mess it up too badly. Stop that. Juliet's voice was sharp enough to make him look up. Stop diminishing yourself. You're here. You showed up. You kept showing up every day, even when the world ended. That's not nothing. That's everything. Evan felt the words land in a place he hadn't known was waiting for them. For 3 years, he'd been operating on autopilot, doing what needed to be done because Mia needed him, but never acknowledging that continuing to exist was itself an act of courage. I don't feel brave, he admitted. I feel like I'm barely holding it together most days. Brave and barely holding it together aren't mutually exclusive. Juliet smiled, sad but genuine. I'm barely holding it together right now. I've cried more tonight than I have in 5 years combined. My carefully constructed walls are demolished, and I'm terrified of what happens when we leave here and real life intrudes again. What do you think will happen? I don't know. Maybe we'll exchange numbers and never call. Maybe we'll try to make this work and realize it was just the storm that made it feel possible. Maybe... She stopped, biting her lip. Maybe we'll be brave enough to keep choosing each other even when it's scary. Evan leaned forward, closing the small distance between them across the table. I want to be that brave. I want to believe we could build something from all these broken pieces, but I don't know how to trust that good things won't be taken away. I don't know how to hope without waiting for disaster. So we do it badly, Juliet said. We hope badly, trust badly, build something badly. We mess it up and start over and mess it up again, but at least we do it together instead of alone. Hope badly, Evan repeated, testing the words. I think I can manage that. Yeah? Yeah. They sat in that agreement as the night deepened and the storm finally began to show signs of weakening. The wind's howl dropped to a moan, then to a whisper. Snow still fell, but with less violence, more like a blessing than an assault. Through the restaurant windows, the faintest hint of gray began to lighten the eastern horizon. Morning was coming. The strange liminal space of the night was drawing to a close. Soon they'd have to face the ordinary world again, with all its complications and demands, and the harsh light of day that made fairy tales impossible. But for now, they sat together, Evan and Juliet with Mia sleeping between them, and chose to believe that maybe, just maybe, broken people really could help each other heal, even if they had to do it badly, even if they were terrified, even if the universe had taught them both that nothing good lasted forever. They chose to try anyway. And in that choice, something new began to take shape. Not a replacement for what they'd lost. Not a fairy tale ending that erased their pain. Just two people deciding that hope, however fragile, however badly executed, was worth the risk of believing in it again. Dawn arrived not with fanfare, but with quiet inevitability, gray light seeping through the restaurant windows like watercolor bleeding across paper. Evan woke from a half-sleep he hadn't realized he'd fallen into, his neck stiff from the awkward angle against the booth, his hand still resting near Juliet's on the table where it had landed sometime during the night. She was awake already, watching the world outside transform from black to pewter to pale silver. Snow covered everything, cars buried to their windows, streetlights wearing white crowns, the entire city wrapped in silence so profound it felt sacred. The storm had passed, leaving behind the kind of stillness that only comes after nature has spent all its fury. "It's beautiful," Juliet said softly, not looking away from the window. "Terrible and beautiful." Evan understood what she meant. The storm had trapped them, endangered them, nearly killed them. But it had also created this, whatever this was, between them. Sometimes the most destructive forces carved out space for new things to grow. Mia was still asleep, her face peaceful in a way that made Evan's chest ache with love and terror in equal measure. She'd been so brave last night, so certain about things he couldn't let himself believe in. What if she was wrong? What if he and Juliet tried to build something and it collapsed, leaving Mia to witness another loss? "You're spiraling," Juliet observed, finally turning to look at him. "I can see it in your face. All the what-ifs crowding in now that the night is over." "Aren't you?" "Absolutely. I've been awake for an hour running through every possible disaster scenario." She smiled, but it was tinged with fear. This is the part where real life comes back, where we have to decide if what happened here can survive outside these walls. Before Evan could respond, Patricia appeared with coffee and the kind of warm smile that suggested she'd been watching their table with approval. "Morning, you two. Storm's over. City's already started plowing the main roads. Give it another hour and you should be able to get home safely." "Thank you," Evan said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "For everything, for letting us stay, for taking care of everyone." "Oh, honey, that's what we do, take care of people." Patricia's eyes moved between them knowingly. "Though I hope you two take care of each other after you leave here. Would be a shame to waste what you found." After she walked away, Juliet laughed softly. "She's not subtle." "No, but she's not wrong either." Evan wrapped his hands around the hot mug, gathering courage. "Juliet, I need to ask you something. And I need you to be completely honest, even if you think it'll hurt me." She straightened, her expression suddenly guarded. "Okay. Last night, all of it, the honesty and the connection and the feeling that maybe we could be something, was that real? Or was it just trauma bonding and circumstance and two lonely people finding comfort in a crisis?" Juliet was quiet for a long moment, her fingers finding that silver bracelet again, twisting it in the familiar, anxious gesture. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful. "I don't know how to separate those things. The trauma is part of who I am now. The loneliness is woven into my daily existence. So yes, maybe what we felt was influenced by circumstance, but does that make it less real? I don't know." "Me neither." She leaned forward, intensity blazing in her eyes. "But I know that I haven't felt this alive in 5 years. I know that your daughter saw something in me worth saving, and I want to be worthy of that. I know that when you looked at me, you didn't try to fix me or pity me or turn my grief into your redemption project. And I know—" Her voice caught. "I know that I want to see what happens next, even though it terrifies me, even though I've spent 5 years building walls specifically to prevent this kind of wanting." Evan felt something loosen in his chest. "I'm scared I'll disappoint you, that you'll wake up in a few weeks and realize I'm just a sad single dad with nothing to offer someone like you." "Someone like me?" Juliet's eyebrows rose. Evan, I'm a disaster. I have panic attacks in grocery stores. I can't maintain relationships. I've been in therapy for 5 years and I'm still a mess. What exactly do you think you're getting? Someone brave enough to run into a blizzard to help a stranger? Someone who cries ugly tears and doesn't apologize for them? Someone who talks to my daughter like she's a whole person, not just a cute accessory to my tragedy? He paused, feeling the weight of what he was about to say. Someone who makes me believe that maybe I'm allowed to want things again. Juliet's eyes shimmered. We're both disasters then. Matching disasters. The worst kind. She reached across the table, and this time, when their hands met, it felt less like accident and more like choice. So what do we do? Exchange numbers and promise to call? That feels too casual for what this was. Agreed, but jumping straight to let's build a life together feels insane. Also agreed. Evan found himself smiling despite the fear still coiled in his gut. Maybe we just take it one step at a time. See each other again. Intentionally this time, not because a storm trapped us. A real date, Juliet said slowly, where we choose to spend time together instead of being forced to. Exactly. And if it's terrible, if the magic was just the storm and the crisis and the adrenaline, then we'll know. No harm done. Juliet's expression turned serious. Except there would be harm. Mia's already attached. If we try and fail, she'll be hurt. The observation landed like a stone in still water. Evan looked at his sleeping daughter, so certain in her belief that Juliet was meant to be part of their lives, and felt fear spike through him. You're right. Maybe we shouldn't— I didn't say we shouldn't try, Juliet interrupted. I just said we need to be aware of the stakes. We're not just risking our own hearts here. We're risking hers. She squeezed his hand. Which means if we do this, we do it honestly. No pretending things are fine when they're not. No staying together out of obligation if it's not working. We owe Mia the truth, whatever that truth turns out to be. Evan absorbed this, understanding the wisdom in it even as it scared him. Honesty meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant the possibility of devastation. But the alternative was teaching Mia that hope was dangerous, that trying was foolish, that the world was safer if you never reached for anything good. Okay, he said. Honesty. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. They sat in that agreement as the restaurant slowly came to life around them. Other patrons were waking, stretching, gathering their things, and preparing to return to their regular lives. Patricia and her staff were already serving coffee and breakfast to those who wanted it, acting as if hosting an overnight shelter was just part of the normal Christmas morning routine. Mia stirred, her eyes fluttering open, and her first instinct was to look for Evan. When she found him, relief flooded her small face, followed immediately by joy when she saw Juliet still there. You stayed, Mia said to Juliet, her voice thick with sleep. I thought maybe you'd leave while I was sleeping. I stayed, Juliet confirmed. Your dad and I were just watching the snow. It's pretty. Mia sat up, peering out the window at the transformed world. Everything looks new. It does, Evan agreed, though he was looking at Juliet when he said it. They had breakfast together, scrambled eggs and toast that Patricia insisted on giving them for free, claiming it was Christmas and they'd been through enough. The meal felt surreal in its normalcy, the three of them sitting together like a family, passing syrup and discussing whether the snowplows would clear their streets first or last. But underneath the ordinary conversation, Evan felt the weight of impending separation. Soon they'd leave this warm cocoon and return to separate homes, separate lives. The question of whether they'd actually see each other again hung unspoken between them. It was Mia who finally addressed it directly, in the way only children could. When are we going to see Juliet again, Daddy? Evan and Juliet exchanged glances. They hadn't actually made concrete plans, had danced around commitment while promising honesty. I don't know, sweetheart, Evan started, but Juliet was already pulling out her phone. What about New Year's Eve? She said, her voice carrying a determination that hadn't been there a moment before. That's less than a week away. We could, I don't know, do something, if you want to. Like what? Mia asked, bouncing slightly with excitement. I have no idea. I don't usually celebrate New Year's. Juliet looked at Evan. What do you usually do? Stay home. Order pizza. Watch the ball drop on TV with Mia. It sounded pathetic when he said it out loud, but it was the truth. Emma loved New Year's, used to drag me to parties and make elaborate plans. After she died, I couldn't... He stopped, the familiar guilt rising. I couldn't pretend to celebrate anything. Then we won't pretend, Juliet said firmly. We'll just be together. Order pizza, watch TV, let Mia stay up too late. Nothing elaborate, nothing performative, just us figuring out if we can exist in the same space when there's no storm forcing us to. Mia was nodding enthusiastically. Can we make paper snowflakes? Mommy and I used to make them every year, but Daddy doesn't know how to cut them right. Hey, Evan protested, but he was smiling. I try my best. Your best is terrible, Daddy. They always look like blobs. Juliet laughed, and the sound was lighter than anything Evan had heard from her all night. I can help with snowflakes. Sophie and I used to have competitions to see who could make the most intricate designs. Her smile turned bittersweet. I haven't made one since she died. But maybe it's time. Maybe it's time, Evan echoed, and he wasn't just talking about snowflakes. They exchanged numbers, making the abstract concrete. Juliet programmed her contact information into Evan's phone while he did the same with hers, and there was something deeply vulnerable about it, this small act of saying yes. I want you to be able to reach me. I want to be reachable. When it was finally time to leave, Patricia hugged each of them like they were family. You take care of each other, she said, looking meaningfully between Evan and Juliet. And Mia, you keep being the wise one. Someone has to keep these two from overthinking everything. I will, Mia promised solemnly. The cold outside was shocking after the warmth of the restaurant, but the wind had died completely. The world lay silent and pristine under its blanket of snow, the storm's violence erased by morning light. Evan's car was buried but retrievable. Juliet's was in the same condition a few spaces away. They stood in the parking lot for a moment, none of them quite ready to separate, and Evan felt the weight of the ending pressing down. This strange, terrible, beautiful night was over. Now they had to see if anything they'd built could survive daylight. I'll text you, Juliet said, and there was uncertainty in her voice. Tonight, just to make sure you both got home okay. I'd like that. Evan wanted to say more, wanted to find words that captured the magnitude of what had happened, but they all felt inadequate. So instead he just said, thank you for staying, for being honest, for running into the storm. Thank you for coming after me. Juliet crouched down to Mia's level. And thank you for seeing something in me worth saving. That was the bravest thing anyone's done for me in a long time. Mia threw her arms around Juliet's neck, and Evan watched as Juliet held his daughter like she was something precious. When they separated, both had tears in their eyes. See you on New Year's, Mia said. Don't forget about us. I couldn't if I tried, Juliet promised. They separated then, heading to their respective cars, and Evan felt the distance like a physical ache. He helped Mia into her booster seat, started the engine, began the process of digging out. When he looked up, Juliet was doing the same, and their eyes met across the parking lot. She waved. He waved back. And then they were leaving, pulling out onto streets that were already being cleared, heading back to their separate lives. The drive home was quiet. Mia fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from the night's drama, and Evan was alone with his thoughts. The apartment when they arrived felt exactly the same. Same furniture, same photos on the walls, same ghost of Emma in every corner. But somehow Evan felt different inside it. He tucked Mia into her bed, still wearing her clothes from last night because she was too tired to change, and watched her sleep for a moment. She looked peaceful, happy, like she'd accomplished something important. His phone buzzed as he was making coffee, and his heart jumped before he even looked at the screen. But it was just Carol. Survived the storm? Mia okay? How was the date? He stared at the message, unsure how to answer. How was the date? It had been a disaster and a revelation. It had nearly killed them and possibly saved them. It had been the worst first date in history, and somehow also the best. We're fine, he typed back. Date was complicated. We'll explain later. Complicated good or complicated bad? Yes. Carol sent back a string of confused emojis, but Evan didn't elaborate. He made his coffee and sat at the small kitchen table where he and Emma used to have breakfast together, where Mia did her homework, where life happened in its ordinary way. Through the window, he could see the snow-covered neighborhood, everything quiet and clean. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Juliet. Made it home. Thank you for last night. For all of it. I know it was strange and terrifying and probably a terrible idea, but I'm glad it happened. Evan found himself smiling at the screen. Me too. Strange and terrifying seems to be our specialty. Should we be worried about that? Probably, but I'm choosing not to be. For now. There was a pause, then, Evan? I'm scared. Me too. But you're still willing to try? New Year's Eve. He thought about Mia's drawing, the house with 3 figures holding hands. Thought about Juliet running into the blizzard, sitting on the floor crying without pretense, holding his daughter like she mattered. Thought about hope badly executed, about broken people helping each other heal, about being brave when everything in you screamed to run. Yes, he typed, I'm still willing to try. The days between Christmas and New Year's passed in a strange state of suspended animation. Evan taught his classes, came home to Mia, went through all the ordinary motions of life. But underneath the routine, something was shifting. He found himself humming in the car, not singing, not yet, but humming. Found himself thinking about the future, not with dread, but with cautious curiosity. Found himself checking his phone more than he should, reading and rereading the messages Juliet sent. They texted every day. Nothing profound, just small observations about their lives. She told him about a disastrous presentation at work. He told her about a student who'd finally understood the Civil War after months of struggling. She sent him a photo of her apartment's view of the snow-covered city. He sent her a picture of Mia's latest drawing. Another house, another set of 3 figures, this time with a dog that Mia insisted they needed to get. We're not getting a dog, he texted. Why not? Dogs are great. You sound like Mia. Mia is clearly the smartest person in your family. He smiled at his phone like a teenager, and when Mia caught him doing it, she just grinned knowingly and went back to her coloring. Carol called on December 28th, demanding details he'd been avoiding. He told her an edited version, the storm, the overnight shelter, the connection he'd felt with Juliet. He left out Damon's cruelty, the near-death experience, the depth of their vulnerability with each other. So you're seeing her again? Carol asked, and he could hear the hope in her voice. New Year's Eve, just low-key, at the apartment. That's huge, Evan, that's... Carol's voice caught. Emma would be happy. You know that, right? She'd want you to find someone. The words hit harder than expected. I don't know if I'm finding someone. We're just seeing what happens. That's how everyone finds someone. You see what happens, and sometimes what happens is love. After he hung up, Evan sat with that word. Love. It felt too big, too soon, too impossible. But then again, everything about this felt impossible. Maybe impossible was the point. New Year's Eve arrived with clear skies and bitter cold. Evan cleaned the apartment with nervous energy, unsure what he was preparing for. It was just pizza and TV, just a casual evening. But it felt momentous anyway, this first time choosing to be together without crisis forcing their hand. Mia was vibrating with excitement, changing her outfit 3 times before settling on her favorite dress, purple with snowflakes, the one Emma had bought her last Christmas. Evan felt a pang seeing it, but didn't ask her to change. Emma was part of this, would always be part of this. Juliet understood that. When the doorbell rang at 6 o'clock, Mia raced to answer it, and Evan had to physically stop her from opening it without checking the peephole first. Some lessons from tragedy stayed permanent. Juliet stood in the hallway holding a bag of craft supplies and wearing jeans and a soft sweater instead of the expensive outfits from the restaurant. Her hair was down, her makeup minimal, and she looked nervous in a way that made Evan's own anxiety ease slightly. They were both terrified. That was okay. Hi, she said. Hi, he replied, and they just looked at each other for a moment before Mia grabbed Juliet's hand and pulled her inside. The evening unfolded with surprising ease. They ordered pizza, Mia insisting on pineapple despite both adults protesting, and spread out the craft supplies on the living room floor. Juliet taught them the proper way to fold paper for snowflakes, her hands moving with a grace that came from years of practice with Sophie. Like this, she said, guiding Mia's scissors. You want to cut curves, not straight lines. That's what makes them look like actual snowflakes instead of blobs. See, Daddy? Mia said triumphantly. Blobs. I make very artistic blobs, Evan defended, but he was laughing. They hung the finished snowflakes in the window where they caught the light from the street lamps outside. Mia declared them perfect and immediately started making more. Evan and Juliet sat on the couch, close but not touching, watching her work. She's happy, Juliet observed quietly. Really, genuinely happy. She is. She's been different since Christmas. Like she's carrying less weight. Evan paused. I think she was worried about me, about whether I'd ever be okay again. And seeing me try, even badly, gave her permission to stop worrying. Kids shouldn't have to worry about their parents. No, but sometimes they do anyway, especially when their parents are disasters. Juliet smiled. Matching disasters. The worst kind. They fell into comfortable silence, and Evan marveled at how natural this felt. He'd been so scared it would be awkward outside the crisis context that they'd run out of things to say or discover they had nothing in common beyond shared trauma. But instead, it felt like coming home. As midnight approached, they turned on the TV to watch the ball drop. Mia was starting to fade, fighting sleep with determined enthusiasm, insisting she'd make it to midnight even as her eyes drooped. 5 minutes, Evan told her. You can stay awake for 5 more minutes. Can so, Mia mumbled, curling against his side. Juliet had gone quiet, staring at the TV without really seeing it. Evan recognized the expression. She was somewhere else, probably remembering other New Year's Eves with Sophie, with her ex-fiancé, in a life that felt like a different person's memories. You okay? He asked softly. Yeah, just... The last time I celebrated New Year's was with Sophie. 5 years ago. She was so excited about college, about her future. She had this whole plan for the next decade mapped out. Juliet's voice was thick. And then 6 weeks later, she was gone. All those plans just evaporated. Evan reached out, taking her hand. But you're here, making new plans, new memories. That's not betraying her. I know. Logically, I know that. But guilt isn't logical. No, he agreed. It really isn't. On the TV, the countdown began. 10, 9, 8. Around the city and the world, people were celebrating, kissing, making resolutions they wouldn't keep. 7, 6, 5. Mia was almost asleep, her breathing evening out. 4, 3, 2. Evan looked at Juliet, really looked at her, seeing past the grief and fear to the person underneath. Someone brave enough to risk feeling again. Someone who'd chosen to be here, in his messy apartment with his daughter and his ghosts, when she could have stayed safe in her own isolation. 1. The ball dropped. Fireworks exploded on the screen. The crowd roared with celebration. And Evan leaned in slowly, giving Juliet time to pull away, and kissed her. It was gentle, tentative, a question more than a statement. Her lips were soft, and she tasted like the cheap champagne they'd been drinking, and for a moment Evan's mind supplied comparison to kissing Emma. Emma had been more aggressive, more certain, had always kissed like she was claiming something. But then Juliet kissed him back, and the comparison dissolved. This wasn't better or worse than Emma. It was just different, new, its own thing entirely. When they pulled apart, her eyes were shining. "Happy New Year," she whispered. "Happy New Year?" he replied. Mia stirred, murmuring something that sounded like "told you so" before settling back into sleep. Evan laughed, feeling lighter than he had in 3 years. "She's never going to let us live this down." "No," Juliet agreed, smiling. "She's going to be insufferable." "She's already insufferable." "True." Juliet looked down at Mia's sleeping face, then back at Evan. "Is this insane, what we're doing? 2 broken people trying to build something when we're barely functional individually?" "Completely insane," Evan confirmed. "Terrible idea. Probably doomed." "But we're doing it anyway?" "Yeah, we're doing it anyway." Because that was the thing about hope. It didn't require certainty or guarantees. It just required the willingness to try. to believe that maybe, possibly, against all odds and logic and the lessons grief had taught them, something good could grow from the broken pieces. Evan carried Mia to her bed while Juliet cleaned up the craft supplies. When he returned to the living room, she was standing by the window looking at the snowflakes they'd made, backlit by streetlights and distant fireworks still popping across the city. "I should probably go," she said, but didn't move toward the door. "You could stay," Evan offered, then quickly clarified. "On the couch, you could go home. That's fine too. I'm not trying to be—" "Evan," Juliet turned to face him, amused. "Breathe, I know what you meant. Right, sorry. I'm not good at this." "Neither am I. We're both terrible at this." She crossed the room to stand in front of him. "But I think that's okay. We can be terrible at it together." "Hope badly," Evan said, remembering. "Hope badly," she agreed. She ended up staying, curled on the couch under a blanket Evan brought her, and he lay awake in his bedroom listening to the old building creak and settle. Through the walls he could hear the faint sound of her breathing, and it felt significant somehow. Having someone else in his space, sharing the air, existing alongside his grief without trying to erase it. In the morning, he woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of voices in the kitchen. When he emerged, rubbing sleep from his eyes, he found Juliet and Mia making pancakes together, Mia standing on a stool to reach the counter while Juliet supervised. "We're making shapes," Mia announced. "Juliet can make a snowflake pancake. Watch." She did watch, and saw Juliet carefully pour batter into an intricate pattern that did indeed resemble a snowflake. When she flipped it, the design held, and Mia clapped with delight. "Your turn, Daddy," Mia said. "Make a heart." "I don't think I can." "Try," Juliet encouraged, handing him the ladle. "Fail spectacularly. It'll be fun." So he tried, and it was a disaster, and they all laughed, and for the first time since Emma died, Evan's apartment felt like a home instead of a museum. The weeks that followed weren't easy. There were moments when Evan's grief surged and he withdrew, unable to give Juliet what she needed. Times when Juliet's anxiety spiked and she pushed him away, terrified of the vulnerability. Days when they both questioned whether they were doing this out of genuine connection or just desperate loneliness. But they kept choosing each other, kept showing up even when it was hard, kept being honest about the fear and doubt and the constant weight of their respective losses. Mia was their anchor, her unwavering certainty that they belonged together, providing ballast when doubt threatened to capsize them. She drew pictures of their future, always three figures, eventually with the dog she was still campaigning for. She talked about Juliet constantly at school until her teacher asked if she had a new stepmother, and Evan had to gently explain that it was more complicated than that. "How is it complicated?" Mia had asked. "She's family now." "We're still figuring out what that means, sweetheart." "It means she's family," Mia insisted with 7-year-old logic. "That's what it means." And maybe she was right. Maybe family was just people who chose to show up, to stay, to build something from whatever broken pieces they had available. 6 months later, when Juliet's lease was up and the question of moving in together arose, it was Mia who lobbied hardest for it. "She already has a toothbrush here," she'd pointed out, "and clothes in Daddy's drawer. She's basically already living here. We should make it official." "You're very bossy," Juliet had said, but she was smiling. "I know. Daddy says I get it from Mommy." The name didn't hurt as much anymore. Evan had learned to talk about Emma without feeling like he was being unfaithful. Juliet had learned to listen without feeling like she was competing with a ghost. They'd created space in their relationship for Emma and Sophie both, not as obstacles, but as part of the foundation they were building on. On the first anniversary of that Christmas Eve storm, they went back to Marigold Bistro. Patricia hugged them like they were returning war heroes and insisted their meal was on the house. They sat at the same table, though this time there was no awkwardness, no strained silence. Mia was 8 now, even more perceptive, and she looked between them with satisfaction. "You're happy," she observed. "Really happy. Not pretend happy." "We are," Evan agreed, reaching across the table to take Juliet's hand. "Thanks to you." "And the storm," Mia added. "The storm helped too." "The storm helped," Juliet agreed, squeezing Evan's hand. "Sometimes the worst things lead to the best things. Sometimes being broken is exactly what you need to be open to being put back together." Later, when they were home and Mia was asleep, Evan and Juliet stood by the window looking at the snowflakes that still hung there from that first New Year's Eve. They'd made new ones since then, but these originals remained, slightly yellowed with time but still catching the light. "I never thought I'd be here," Juliet said quietly. Happy, building a life with someone, feeling like maybe the universe didn't completely break me. Me neither. Evan wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I thought my life ended when Emma died, that I'd just be going through motions until Mia grew up and I could figure out how to just stop. And now? Now I want to keep going, not because I have to, but because I want to see what happens next. With you. With Mia. With whatever we're building here." "Hope badly," Juliet murmured. "Hope badly," Evan confirmed. "Together." Outside, new snow began to fall, and Evan thought about that Christmas Eve night, about the storm that had trapped them and nearly killed them and ultimately saved them. Thought about Mia whispering, "She's the one, Daddy," with the certainty only children possess. Thought about broken people finding each other in the worst possible circumstances and choosing to build something from the wreckage. It wasn't a fairy tale. There was no magical healing, no erasing of trauma, no perfect ending that made everything that came before worthwhile. But it was real. It was messy and hard and required constant choice and effort and the willingness to hope badly when everything taught you not to hope at all. And maybe that was better than a fairy tale anyway. Maybe real love, the kind built from honest brokenness rather than performative wholeness, was stronger precisely because it acknowledged the cracks while refusing to let them define the entire structure. "I love you," Juliet said, and it was the first time either of them had said it. "I'm terrified, and I'm still waiting for disaster, and I don't trust good things to last. But I love you anyway." Evan turned her in his arms so he could see her face, saw the fear there, and the hope, and the fierce determination to keep choosing bravery even when everything in her screamed to run. "I love you too," he said, badly, imperfectly, with all my broken pieces. "Those are the best pieces," she replied, and kissed him. In her bedroom, Mia slept peacefully, dreaming whatever children dream about when their world finally makes sense again. On the wall above her bed hung her latest drawing, a house with 3 figures and, yes, finally, a dog. Below it, in her careful handwriting, she'd written, "My family, the one I helped make." And in the living room, 2 broken people held each other while snow fell outside and the future stretched ahead of them, uncertain, terrifying, and full of the kind of hope that only comes from surviving the storm and choosing to believe in warmth anyway. It wasn't the ending they'd planned. Neither of them had planned any of this, but maybe that was the point. Maybe the best things in life weren't planned at all. Maybe they just happened when you were brave enough to walk into the storm and trust that someone would come after you, that you'd come after them too, that broken people really could help each other heal. Not by fixing what was unfixable, but by bearing witness to each other's brokenness and saying, "It's okay, I'm broken too, let's be broken together." And maybe that was enough. Maybe, just maybe, it was everything.